Hello, you. Yes, you. Welcome back to this, Season 14, Episode 25 of the Ubuntu podcast. Today, it's Tuesday, the 24th of August. We're going to be rounding up some community news from the Ubuntu world and some of our favourite picks from the tech news. And joining me this week are Alan.
Hello.
Hello, Alan. And Mark.
Hello, hello.
Hello. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you two with Reese in the last two episodes whilst I was apparently in prison.
Yeah, I tweeted that out thinking, what can I put here that would be something other than boring Martin's on holiday? So I thought, let's say he's in prison. Nobody believed me, obviously.
No, clearly not. So, Alan, what have you been up to recently?
I've made a bit of a mistake.
Uh-oh.
I've been selling stuff on eBay, and that means I keep opening the eBay web page, which means I buy things on eBay. So,
okay.
I recently bought an Amstrad PCW8256 word processor.
Man.
Boxed,
you are incorrigible.
Boxed complete with manuals and printer as well. Dot matrix printer. I have achieved my pinnacle, which is buying a dot matrix printer. Yes, Mark.
I think I was joking with you the other day about hearing the noise of a dot matrix printer.
So when you say word processor, this is from before a word processor was a piece of software and when there was actually a device that was called a word processor.
Designed by Amstrad to appeal to the office clerk who wants something that is more advanced than a typewriter. And it has a screen and it has 3-inch floppy disk drives, which are the same ones that go in the Amstrad CPC range, hence Amstrad, and the Sinclair Spectrum Plus 3. And I have been repairing or trying to repair the 3-inch drive in the Amstrad PCW because they have a penchant for the rubber ring that goes around the motor, and the drive belt is the word I'm looking for, tends to go. But you can buy these on eBay and you can repair your Amstrad 3-inch drive. And sometimes they need capacitors replacing and stuff like that. But I got it working. And so I was quite delighted to chuck in a bunch of 3-inch floppy disks and open some documents from a person who happened to give me these floppy disks 20 plus years ago. And they were building quotes and stuff that, someone has written for renovations to a house or something. And it was just a little snapshot into the past, but it was quite fun to repair this little thing.
Wow. Okay, Mark, have you been stealing people's identity from 20 years ago by procuring their old computing devices off eBay?
I'm afraid not. I have been reading magazines.
What sort of magazines? Is this safe for the show?
Very much so. Very, very on topic. So, about 15 years ago, I used to subscribe to paper magazines and sit and read them, but I don't really do that anymore. But I recently discovered an app called Libby, which is a library app. Now, I had a look at it, and the books on offer, it offers ebooks and audiobooks that you can get on your phone using your library card, so for free. And the books on offer didn't really appeal to me, but I had a browse through the magazine section, and they've got quite a good selection of tech-related magazines. And music-related magazines. So I've subscribed to a few, and I was startled by how nice an experience it is to read a magazine article rather than reading a web page, because it's been in the 15 years between when I last subscribed to a magazine. Like, the web has become a really horrible place to consume content, and by comparison, reading a magazine where there's not a million things getting in your way and vying for your attention and trying to get you to go somewhere else is just a really enjoyable way of consuming content, and I'm going to keep doing it.
Turns out you don't have to install an ad blocker when you visit the library, do you?
Quite so.
That's rather uplifting. I like that. And I assume these are all current day magazines. They're not like republications of magazines from the past.
They're not Amstrad magazines from the 1980s.
No, you can get back issues, but no, this is like current issues of current magazines.
Right.
Just like if you walked into a library and picked up what was on the shelf there.
Wonderful. That sounds terrific.
So yes, if you have a library card, download Libby. And in fact, it's pretty much a progressive web app as well. So if you just go to libbyapp.com in your web browser, and you can use your, install this page as an app, and it basically works the same as the phone app. The only thing I've noticed differently is that you don't get it doesn't ping you with notifications when there's a new issue available, but you can read, if you've opened something, you can read it offline, and it syncs between different devices as well, so you can pick up where you left off. It's very good.
Nice.
Right, and before we move on, I would like to remind all of you that we have a crowdfunder running to cover the costs of our audio production services that are provided by Joe Ressington. So if you'd like to support our fabulous audio engineering, then please head to ubuntupodcast.org/donate. And with that, let's move on. Right, now it's time for some community news. Mark.
GNOME Shell now runs on M1 Macs.
This is absolutely amazing, I think, reading the progress of the engineers that are working on this reverse engineering effort.
It's quite impressive, isn't it? So this is the Asahi Linux project, which is aiming to bring Linux to the M1 Macs, which I think there's a MacBook and is it a Mac Mini or an iMac as well?
Yeah, it's the Mini. Yeah,
and the iMac. They're all based on the M1 now.
Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And this is a full GNOME Shell desktop environment running with. They've said it's a near mainline kernel. So there's I think a couple of drivers developed by other people in there, and they've had to write their own display driver. No hardware acceleration or anything like that yet, but it works. Basically,
it works well by the reports. So you say a near mainline kernel. I read sort of the progress here, and they've worked very hard to establish an early relationship with the kernel, the developer community, in order that they've been able to upstream their work as rapidly as possible, which is why I think it's a 5.13 kernel holds most of what's needed to bring this up.
That's really good.
But then when you read about the reverse engineering efforts, it's remarkable the lengths they've gone to.
We've mentioned the Patreon for supporting the M1 Mac chips, where Macron, is it Macron? I never know the guy's name, but he's well known for significant porting efforts in the past and has been part of this process to get everything working on the M1. And I'm torn because part of me thinks this is fantastic, this is great, because it's really delightful hardware, and the idea of running a free operating system on this hardware that has potentially really super battery life and really great performance and no noise because there's no fan is a delightful objective to get towards. But the flip side of me thinks this shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be that modern hardware requires all this money being thrown at like one guy and his dog in order to get this thing working. It shouldn't be this hard, but it turns out it is.
So I've got a slightly different take on that as well. But one of the reasons it's so hard, of course, is that Apple have provided zero documentation for how some of the custom chips in the M1 silicon actually function. So I was reading one of the blog posts where they said the only actual documentation is macOS itself. And I'll get back to that in just a moment as to how they're like using macOS. But my concern about this is, whilst I utterly admire the sort of the engineering initiative behind this, it's just phenomenal. My big worry is that Apple will take our toys away, because there is no real incentive for Apple to have Linux running on this hardware. And it's kind of open in this initial version, and I think that was a deliberate move. But I worry in time, the hardware will become more and more locked down, and installing Linux on future generations may be harder or impossible.
Well, the rumor is the M1X based devices, including a new Mac Mini, will be coming later this year. So we don't have to wait too long to find out what Apple's strategy in terms of locking down or keeping it open, or actually probably, I would imagine, their perspective is don't care. I think they don't care about someone who is a micro percentage. Like the vast majority of people who buy an an M1 based Mac are buying it to run OS 10 and the applications on top of that. And that also makes me a little bit incredulous. The GNOME shell runs really well, or surprisingly well. I'll tell you what, you put it side by side with OS 10 on the same M1, it runs like dog poo. It does not run really, really well compared to the native operating system that the thing was built for. Yes, Apple have billions in the bank and lots of engineers, and it's all tightly integrated, and they've got the vertical integration and everything. Yeah, I get that. I understand why this is the case. But let's not celebrate too early, because if people go out there and buy these M1 devices and they get a super subpar, just about 60 frames a second desktop experience, and poor battery life, then they're not going to be super pleased. But that's the life of a Linux user, right?
It really is, yeah. We'll have a link in the show notes to the tweet that we're referencing, and in that tweet thread, there's a link to a blog post which outlines in some significant detail how they've created a thin shim of a hypervisor that actually runs macOS and intercepts all of the system calls, and that's how they're building sort of a map of the functionality of the hardware in the M1 and mapping out what it does and how it works. So this is like how they're reverse engineering it without actually like decompiling code, which would mean anything they learned from a decompilation they couldn't reuse. So it's a good read.
Don't get me wrong, it's brilliant work. It is amazing effort that these people are putting in. And it's not just one person and their dog. There's a whole bunch of people who are contributing to this thing, like all open source products. It's pretty amazing.
Alan.
Canonical and DFI pair up for an industrial Pi powered by AMD and Ubuntu.
DFI, didn't they used to make sofas?
Hey! There's probably a jingle on a TV advert that you could sing at this point. So no, this is a company that make boards, single board computers, that are interesting, like the Raspberry, like a Raspberry Pi would be, but with a lot more connectivity and, somewhat importantly, not an ARM-based CPU, but an AMD Ryzen-based CPU, which makes it super interesting. It's got a couple of micro HDMI ports, USB 3 port, some other useful ports like eMMC chip on board, and all kinds of other modern stuff. So it's like a modern Raspberry Pi device, but with an x86 CPU. Which is interesting, and it's certified to run Ubuntu.
Yeah, so it comes with Ubuntu 2004 LTS out of the box. I think one of them can also run Windows 10, but we won't talk about that.
What?
But yeah, but no, I thought it was really interesting to see something like this with an x86, because that means you can run. You don't have to have like a special build of Ubuntu for it, like you do with every single ARM device. You can just run regular old Ubuntu.
Well, true, but they have certified the thing. So there is an ubuntu.com/certified page for this specific device to show that the QA team have said, yes, this thing actually does work with an Ubuntu 2004 image running a 5.8 kernel. So it's not like a super modern kernel. It's not like, an Apple Mac where you have to run like a bleeding edge kernel. You can run something pretty crusty and stable and well supported.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And apparently this is the way, the Ubuntu Code of Conduct. So what's this all about?
So this is a thread on the Ubuntu discourse. Ubuntu community representative Monica Ahens-Maiden has started a discussion about the Ubuntu Code of Conduct in order to give the community an opportunity to reflect on what the Code of Conduct means to us and how it captures our values, and what we think of it, and how we use it going forwards. I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding that she was asking people how they might want to change the Code of Conduct. So some of the replies have gone off in that direction, and there's been an attempt to refocus the discussion around there.
Right.
But yeah, so if anyone's interested in that and wants to share their thoughts on Ubuntu's values and what the Code of Conduct means to them, then that's a good place to go and do it.
Excellent.
So what is the intention of the conversation? If it's not to have a conversation about what the Code of Conduct is?
It's a conversation about what the Code of Conduct is, not how do you think we should change the Code of Conduct.
Okay.
So what it is, what it means to you, and how you make use of it. how it guides you, I
That
imagine.
sort of thing, yeah.
Right.
It's interesting because looking back over the years, the code of conduct has been a stick people use to beat people with. And, when they see someone who says something they don't like or behaves in a way they don't like, they say, oh, well, that's against the code of conduct and I'm going to report you into to the police, the community council. And it always felt like people used it like too much, like a rule book that they pull out of their pocket on a regular basis. And it shouldn't be like that from my perspective. It should be more like a set of guidelines, guiding principles for, a way to behave within the community. Not necessarily a rigid set of rules, but, a set of guidelines.
Yeah, it should be like a set of principles which we know we've all agreed to, and therefore we don't have to worry about it.
Mm.
Yeah. I had the you're in breach of the code of conduct thrown at me some years ago because I was apparently making decisions about Ubuntu Mate without conversing with the community about every minor detail. And it's quite convenient because the Ubuntu code of conduct has a passage about, leaders in the community should make bold decisions about the directions of their project. So you just cut that piece out. And
can't help but think that bit is written for Mark.
I do feel that was probably a selfish statement when that was crafted, yes. Right, well, with that, let's move on. And now it's time for some news headlines, our favourite pick from the big people news. Did you know it's the 25th anniversary of Quake?
Yes. Only because a couple of YouTubers have been talking about it. And I didn't realise it until people talked about it on YouTube.
Well, good news. Not only is it the 25th anniversary of Quake to make us all feel 25 years older, or for Mark, freshly born, but it's also the reimagining of Quake. Quake has returned to all modern computing platforms with an enhanced version.
So for our listeners who perhaps aren't 25 years old, how would you describe Quake?
Bang, bang, shooty, shooty.
First the Earth cooled, then the dinosaurs came, and then computer games were invented. And first there was Wolfenstein, then there was Quake. That's it.
There was Doom in the middle there.
No. There was Wolfenstein, then there was Quake. Doom doesn't exist. Quake is a multi-level first-person shooter with a good soundtrack and good sound effects and good level design. It's a fun game.
And it's 3D as well,
yes.
Which its predecessors were sort of weird 3D
fake
pretend
3D,
sprites shrinking as they got further away from you, whereas this was actually a properly 3D environment.
Textures on a flat plane.
Yeah.
So my understanding is Quake was basically the template from which all modern first-person shooters have descended. It had an arena shooter, it had a single player, it had online multiplayer, it had campaigns and capture the flag. Basically, it had all of the sort of first-person shooter
tropes,
game types, that everything else is sort of borrowed from.
So, I mean, it's been possible to buy Quake on GOG for a while.
Yeah.
I think I have Quake in my collection on GOG. But apparently this new version is better in some way.
Yes.
Apparently. And I've not quite understood exactly how it's better, other than you don't have to use DOSBox in order to run Quake, which obviously is an advantage, you could say.
Well, let me explain, because I am the official games correspondent of the Ubuntu podcast. So it runs on their PCs, which you could use DOSBox on, but it also runs on the Xbox One, the PlayStation 4, the Nintendo Switch, and the Xbox Series X and X, and the PlayStation 5. So runs on everything contemporary, and it supports up to 4K resolution in widescreen, and some of the in-game models have been enhanced, and it's got new lighting effects and depth of field effects. And this is where it gets interesting for first-time purchasers of Quake, because it includes the original game plus all of the original expansions and 2 additional campaign add-ons that were made by third parties that then went on to make other games based on the Quake engine.
Right.
Oh, nice.
So it's kind of everything that they ever released, but revamped for the modern day. And it includes all of the different player modes, so local and online, and it's cross-platform online as well. So it doesn't matter which of those different platforms you've got, you can multiplay.
I only picked up on this from a couple of people who I follow on YouTube. One was LGR playing it on a modern PC, but with a cathode ray tube display for funsies. And the other was ETA Prime. I think that's the right person. No, it's not ETA Prime. It's Modern Vintage Gamer, MVG, who was involved in the development of this thing. And I found that out by the title card of his YouTube video being, I made this, and the Quake logo. So, bit of clickbait there, I think.
Very well done, though.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. It's worth a look. I'm not quite decided if I want to pay for this all over again. I have a boxed copy of Quake, and I don't think I'm qualifying for the upgrade. If you bought it on Steam, you do qualify, but I don't think having the box a boxed version.
Maybe if you
GOG
could send them a photograph of your box and a receipt from WH Smith's, they'll do something.
I have
for
these
you.
things.
When you say a box, this is from when a box that a game came in was the size of a packet of cornflakes, and then had a CD in held in a cardboard insert in the middle.
Ordinarily, under normal circumstances, I would reach out from where I am sat and grab the box of Quake and show it to you on the camera. For the purposes of demonstration, but unfortunately it's out in the garage. But it is a DVD style case.
Okay.
So it's a later re-release of Quake that I have on DVD, yes.
Well, there we go. So, Alan.
Speaking of cornflakes, Mark, I discovered Sainsbury's, the well-known supermarket in the UK, have an archive online, which I'd never seen before. And I was delighted to discover this thing. So, for those who are outside the UK, Sainsbury's is a supermarket that's been around for many, many years, and they sell third-party products like Kellogg's cornflakes and so on. But they also have their own brand products, and the website that I have put a link to in the show notes is like the Internet Archive of Sainsbury's from the past. It has photographs of stores, aerial views of stores, front of shop stores, but also many photographs of products and product design documents about how they designed the boxes and the tins and the glass jars and the labels that go on the jars for all the products over the past. Now, for an old fart like myself, I find this super interesting because you look back over stuff and think, golly, was that designed in 1960? I'm sure I bought those hot cross buns last week, kind of thing. But I just found this delightful to scroll through, and quite a trove of photographs and, kind of archaeology of Sainsbury's and their products and their stores. It's amazing.
It's a nice little cultural time capsule, I thought. I was instantly reminded of two things. The first was my nan's kitchen from 1979. And the second was how beige and orange everything was in the 1970s.
It's funny, there's certain fonts that stick out. Like there's a chocolate flavoured blancmange powder that has a very 70s style font, and it's labelled it came from the 1970s. And like cardboard boxes of puffed wheat that have very bold colours and minimal fonts, and it feels like we've gone round in a cycle and we've come back round to this minimal design of product packaging that's very reminiscent of the late 1960s. I find this super delightful.
Is any of this stuff licensed in a way that lets you reuse it, or is this all just sort of look but don't touch? I'm
not entirely sure. I haven't looked at the license of these things. I don't actually know. There is a terms of use part of the page. It's done in collaboration with the Museum of London.
Okay.
And there is a large terms of use page, which I'm scrolling through now, but nothing is jumping off at me as to say, you can use this for any purpose whatsoever and redesign your products with the Sainsbury's name in. I would imagine not.
Well, even if you're not from the UK, you might want to take a look at this. It's a delightful look back at how things were and how things were once and how they've influenced where we are today. Anyway, Mark.
The Microbit Educational Foundation have launched Microbit Classroom. So this is an online learning tool platform for running coding sessions around the microbit with people perhaps in the same place, perhaps remotely. So you can set up a classroom online, you can upload code files which you want to share with your students, and then you give them a link. They join, and then you can see what they're working on in real time. They get a code editor in the browser. You've either got a Python text editor, basically, or you've got a drag and drop type coding environment. You can see what they're doing in real time, and at the end of it, they can save their work, or you can also save everyone's work and then reload it again at a later session if you want to pick up where you left off. Now, this is really cool because I've done a few sessions online during the past couple of years with the coding club that I help out at, and there's quite a few platforms like this where you can give students something to work on, and they get an editor and they work on it, and we'd be on a video call with them, and then if they got stuck, we'd then have to get them to share a link with us or screen share with us in the call and then try and debug what was going on. So having this where the whole thing is designed with you being able to see what's going on in mind with everyone else and then help them out as you go is a really nice idea. I think it sounds like they've done a really good job.
I think they've learned a lot from the last year of lockdown and Google Classroom and Microsoft Teams. And I think they've built something that, exactly as you say, allows you to dispatch a bunch of work to students wherever they may be. And then, when the class finishes in a couple of hours, you can resume that a week later or whenever, but you actively can review the work that they're doing. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And even when we run classes in person, we have some code set up for them to get them started, or we might have some library files which we write, and then we have to go around and load them onto each of their computers and then make sure they're reset for the next lesson. So even for an in-person thing, just being able to have it set up once centrally and then give them a link and have them all log in and do it that way is a really convenient thing.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. I'm going to take a closer look at this because we're working on some workshop material at work for things we want to teach people. And we're currently looking at Gitpod to actually create, reusable workshop environments where it's just ready to go. So you don't have that first page of the workshop, type all of these things in to set up your system. You can just get on with the educating bit. This sounds fabulous. What a great bit of innovation in the education sector. I love it. And with that, that's the end of the news for this week. And indeed, that is the end of episode 25. Thank you all for listening. Do come back next week. We have a fabulous interview lined up. I'm not going to say who with or what about, but you don't want to miss that. So hit subscribe in your podcatcher now. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll speak to you next time.